Hi guys. We are going to go over our photosynthesis diagram. For some of you, this is the first time you're seeing it. For others of you, this is the second time you're seeing it. But please review this diagram in preparation for the quiz and also for the exam you'll have. It's really good at giving you a visual representation of what is happening during photosynthesis, and I think it will help explain a lot of what's going on with the energy molecules, especially ATP, ADP, and NADP and NADPH. So please make sure as you follow along, you're not only labeling your diagram or checking your labels, but also that you are adding the information to the steps, which are the numbered icons there. So we're going to start at the top left-hand side of your diagram, but just very quickly, I want to make sure that we understand or remember that photosynthesis, if we break the word down, it means putting together with light. So anytime you're synthesizing something, you're putting something new together, and then photo, light. So when you think of pictures, think of a flash, putting together with light. So we're going to start with our first two reactants, and remember that reactants mean ingredients. So these are the things that are going into the plant, okay, or into the algae or into the bacteria, because some bacteria can actually photosynthesize molecules. So sunlight and water are going to enter something called the thylakoid. So this is taking place in the chloroplast within plant cells, but even in more detail, the first part of photosynthesis is happening in the thylakoid or along the thylakoid membrane. So the thylakoid, remember, is just this little pancake layer on our stack. We have a bunch of thylakoids stacked together, and that makes a granum. On the diagram, there's only one granum pictured, but there are tons more within the chloroplast, but I wanted to simplify this as much as I could. So we're just looking at one stack of thylakoids, and this is where sunlight and water are entering, and they will undergo a series of chemical reactions. So sunlight, water come in. The water we know is coming into the plant through the roots, and then it's also going to react with the sunlight, and as a waste product, oxygen gas is being given off. So the plant, lucky for us, actually doesn't use the oxygen gas. It's just released as waste, and it's released pretty early on in the process of photosynthesis. If we look at step 3 and step 4 could kind of be flipped if we talk about our explanation here. They're very well connected, very similar. But what's going to happen is that as this chemical reaction is happening, it's not only releasing the oxygen gas, but it's actually being used to re-energize our energy molecules. We specifically talked about ATP and ADP, but we also have another helper molecule here. ATP isn't enough to keep this process going, so we actually have another electron carrier. So our chemical reaction between sunlight and water is going to help recharge our energy molecules. So here we're going to pick up a phosphate group, and now we're becoming ATP or adenosine triphosphate, and we're also going to pick up another hydrogen or another electron here. Those molecules are now fully charged. This is like your cell phone battery, that your phone that has been plugged in. So the outlet here, or the thylakoid, or this is the plug, here's the cord, and it's charging those ATP and NADPH molecules. Now we're fully charged, so now we're going to take our phone off of the charger, and we're going to use some of that energy. In photosynthesis, these molecules are going to move to the Calvin cycle. So the Calvin cycle is the second major part of photosynthesis, and it's not happening in the thylakoid, like where the sunlight and the water are entering. It's actually happening in something called the stroma, which is the liquidy material, kind of jelly-like material outside of the thylakoid. It's called the stroma. So chemical reaction happening here recharges our energy molecules. Now that those energy molecules are fully charged, they're going to move over and help power the Calvin cycle. After we drop off our energy here, so after we've used our cell phone for a little bit, oh no, now we're at like 12%. So now what do? Now we go back to our charger, or back to the thylakoid and recharge our phone. Okay, the same thing is happening here. We're charged, we walk our energy over to the Calvin cycle, drop it off. Now we're not charged, so now we have to go back to the thylakoid to get recharged. For NADP+, that means adding a hydrogen. For ADP, that means adding a phosphate group. The second part of photosynthesis, like I said, is happening in the stroma. It's called the Calvin cycle. There are many steps going on here in the Calvin cycle. You're lucky you don't have to know the specific steps. But what I do want you to understand is that that energy that ATP and NADPH dropped off is being used to take our third reactant, which is carbon dioxide, which the plant also takes in. It's being used to take that carbon dioxide and have it undergo a series of chemical reactions where we're adding things, moving things, subtracting things in order to make a final product that can be useful to the plant. That final product happens to be glucose. Glucose is a sugar. Another word for sugar is carbohydrate. And the way that we can tell that this molecule is in fact a carbohydrate is by looking at the molecular formula. So its molecular formula is C6H12O6. If we look at that in more detail, we can see that it's a 1 to 2 to 1 ratio. And if we remember our lessons in macromolecules, that 1 to 2 to 1 ratio tells us it's a carbohydrate and it is a primary energy source for living organisms. So here's the overview. I hope the explanation made it a little less stressful because it does look like there's a lot going on, but this is actually a very simplified version of what is happening in photosynthesis. So again, sunlight and water enter the thylakoid. They're undergoing chemical reactions. As part of their chemical reactions, they release oxygen gas. Those chemical reactions also help us recharge our energy molecules. So NADP plus and ADP enter the thylakoid. They get recharged. Now they're fully charged here, and they carry that energy over to the Calvin cycle. The reason that we have to carry that energy over is because, as you see here, we have sunlight helping provide energy for this part of photosynthesis to happen. But if you look on this side of the diagram, we do not have any energy being introduced. No sunlight is being introduced here into the Calvin cycle. So ATP and NADPH provide the energy to take that carbon dioxide that the plant is taking in, change it several times, and turn it into something that is useful to the plant. So it's a food source. It's also a molecule that gets broken down in cellular respiration and is used to make lots of energy for the organism or for the cell. I want you to add a couple more things to your diagram. So I'm actually going to have you split your diagram right in half. Okay, draw a dotted line, use a highlighter, some way to show that we have two main reaction types or examples of, or two big processes, I guess, two different types of processes that are happening in photosynthesis. So this side, the side with the thylakoid and sunlight and water, is what we call, or what we call, the light-dependent reactions. To be dependent on something means that you need it in order to function, you need it in order to work. And so here you can see that one of our reactants is in fact sunlight. And so we have light. We are dependent on light in order for this to happen, in order for this chemical reaction to happen to recharge those molecules. So our reactants for the light-dependent reactions are anything going in or any ingredients that we're putting in. So any arrows that you see pointing into the thylakoid represent a reactant. So sunlight, water, NADP+, and ADP. The products, again, are what we're making at the end of our chemical reaction. And so for light-dependent reactions, we're making oxygen gas, we're making NADPH, and we're making ATP. So all of those arrows going out. Now this side, the right side of this diagram, represents a different type of reaction. There is no sunlight coming in here, and so we are not dependent on sunlight for this part of photosynthesis to happen. The Calvin cycle can actually happen at night in the dark. These reactions are called light independent reactions. So we are not dependent. We do not need sunlight here. Okay. And if we look at our reactants and our products of the light independent reactions, we can identify them pretty easily. So anything that has an arrow pointing into the Calvin cycle is something that we're adding to the reaction. So we have ATP, NADPH are both going into the Calvin cycle, and our third reactant is carbon dioxide. That's also going into the Calvin cycle. At the end of the Calvin cycle, we're making a few things. We're making NADP plus, and we're also making ADP. Okay? And most importantly, we're making sugar or glucose, C6H12O6. I hope this explanation was helpful, and I hope it helped clarify any misconceptions you may have had. Again, this diagram is extremely important for the quiz, for the exam, but also I think to aid in your understanding of what is happening in photosynthesis and how plants actually take that sunlight, that water, that carbon dioxide, and turn it into something useful for themselves and for us as well. This will also be very important when we talk about cellular respiration. This idea that through photosynthesis we make glucose and oxygen gas. Those will be our main reactants in cellular respiration. If you have any questions, please come see me, email me. I would be glad to help you if you're struggling with any part of the diagram. But I hope this gave you a better, more in-depth understanding of what is going on in photosynthesis. Thanks for listening.